As long as humans have been traveling, we've been moving species place to place, some intentionally, many unintentionally. For the U.S. Forest Service's Early Detection Rapid Response Program, or EDRR for short, we are interested in the hitchhikers called bark or ambrosia beetles. An inevitable side effect of the sheer scale of international and national commerce is movement of these pests. Millions of shipping containers enter the U.S. every year, and only a small fraction, perhaps 2%, are ever inspected. Wood is still the first choice when making crates, pallets, dunnage, and other packaging for goods. Much of this wood is of poor quality, and in spite of regulations on the treatment of wood, much infested material still reaches U.S. shores. Aside from the packaging material, many other items made of untreated wood products reach our shores, including logs, decorations, furniture, picture frames, and some live material as well. These wood-boring insects can damage and kill trees both through their feeding and through their transmission of diseases. These images of conifer forest show the extensive damage these beetles can cause. In this case, it's caused by Dendroctonus ponderosi, the native mountain pine beetle. Consider the risk that introduced exotic wood borers pose when they don't arrive with their native predators and diseases. Two relatively recent introductions include the walnut twig beetle, which is causing significant damage to walnuts and their relatives, and the red bay ambrosia beetle, which is killing red bay in the southeast and causing significant damage to avocado, where it's encountered it so far. There are thousands of bark beetle species worldwide, and we need to do our best to keep them out. As the name implies, the purpose of EDRR is to detect these pests early, soon after they're introduced, and to respond quickly to these invasions in order to eradicate them. The program started in 2000 as a joint effort of USDA Forest Service and USDA APHIS. It wasn't called EDRR back then. It was led by the Exotic Pest Rapid Detection Team. The focus was, and still is, bark and ambrosia beetles. From the beginning, all species were identified. In order to fulfill that task, the services of 3 professional beetle taxonomists were employed: Bob Rabalia, Rick Hobeck, and Jim Labonte, who are still with us today. The pilot project lasted until 2005. During that time, 5 bark and ambrosia beetles new to North America were identified: Hylargops palliatus, Xyloborus similis, Xyloporus glabratus, Xyloborus seriatus, Scalitis chevirevi. Many new state records are found as well. The program is no longer a pilot project. Approximately 1/3 of the states will be surveyed each year with Lindgren funnel traps. Now you can be part of the EDRR legacy. EDRR is, at the core, a trapping program. As such, there's a list of supplies you need to acquire to set up traps. First of all, you need to acquire Lindgren funnel traps. You need 3 per site. These traps consist of 12 funnels suspended under a rain shield with a collection cup at the base. We use a wet collection cup, which is filled with a mixture of water and propylene glycol, found in low-toxicity antifreeze. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Equally important is a means to hang the trap. While they can be hung from a tree, it does raise the risk that the tree will be damaged by beetle attack. We find a preferable method to be a stand made from rebar. It is handy to have a short piece of rebar and a hammer to make pilot holes. You'll also need some type of wire to hang the trap from the stake. Wire ties are also useful for securing the trap to the stake. There are 3 lure sets: ethanol, typically a long black pouch, alpha-pinene, a long blue pouch, and Ips lure, which is a 3-component lure. Depending on the supplier, each component may come separately or enclosed together in a mesh pouch. Other lure types may be added in the future. Handle each lure type with a different pair of rubber gloves to prevent contaminating traps. Some of the lure components are repellent to different groups of bark beetles, therefore you don't want to accidentally contaminate the other traps. Low-toxicity antifreeze is used as a killing and preserving agent. In most situations, it should be diluted with equal parts water. You'll want to use undiluted antifreeze when conditions are very rainy and water is likely to dilute the antifreeze. And last but not least, you need a label for the trap. You will need additional supplies for trap checking. You will need an empty container to drain used antifreeze into, a funnel, and paint filters, which can be acquired at local paint suppliers and hardware stores. You will also need a supply of 70% ethanol combined with water and a squeeze bottle to dispense it with, forceps, sealable plastic bags such as Ziploc bags, paper towels, and sample labels. Site selection is one of the most critical components of the EDRR survey. Sites must be selected that have some type of risk of exotic pest introduction. Forested sites near large amounts of high-risk material, including imported plant materials such as trees and shrubs, firewood, international and interstate shipments of commodities, especially when associated with large amounts of wood packing material, are the types of locations that should be targeted. The basics of a good site are: the location is near high-risk importers or other activity. The area has a fair number of trees and woody shrubs of different species, preferably some conifers, some deciduous, and so on. The site is secure and tampering with the trap is unlikely. Now let's look at some poor sites. This is a foundry. They do import large amounts of metal, but not in a form that typically requires wood packing material. They do occasionally import pieces that they don't make themselves from Asia, which does pose a significant risk. There is a modest number of trees in the immediate vicinity, but mostly as street trees. The secure areas inside the fence are much too busy and dangerous, and it would be difficult to place traps near host trees. In the distance, you can see a large city park. This would be a better choice for trap placement. This is a big box building supply and do-it-yourself store. These stores do import large amounts of material from diverse sources. The materials arrive on pallets and they handle nursery stock. There are a fair number of trees of different types in the vicinity. The parking lot is not very secure, but an area behind the building is fenced. Unfortunately, we were not permitted to utilize the back of the store, so our trapping options are poor. This is an international shipping terminal. Ships come from all over the world and often contain low-quality wood as dunnage, not to mention the contents of individual containers. As far as our trapping is concerned, this is a cement and asphalt desert with no trees nearby. A better choice would be wooded areas in the distance. The site is definitely secure. An armed guard sits at the gate and you either have to take a class to get a pass or be escorted on site. Let's look at some decent sites. This is an arboretum. In this case, the arboretum is near downtown and not too far from a large industrial area. It would be nice if it was a little closer to high-risk sites, but you will rarely find an ideal site. The arboretum, by its very nature, has great diversity in tree species available, and the arboretum is large enough that we can find a secluded place for traps to avoid tampering. An example of an ideal site. This is a newsprint production facility. Old paper and wood chips are brought in to make the paper, but all sorts of wood waste is brought in to burn in their power plant. The drop-off is free, so they receive all sorts of yard debris, wood crating, and pallets, and they even receive dunnage that comes off ships in the port. The facility is located at the edge of a neighborhood, is bordered by a park, and there are wooded areas nearby. Placing a trap in the fenced property across the street, backed by a substantial forested area, makes for a nearly ideal site. Once you've selected your site, trap placement is the next most critical step, and there are many variables to consider. The lures used in EDRR are not attractive over long distances. At most, they may be attracting beetles from a few hundred feet. Because of this, the traps need to be placed relatively near hosts. Ethanol lures are generally attractive, but are most likely to bring in beetles that attack deciduous hosts. To be most effective, the ethanol-baited trap needs to be near broadleaf trees. In addition, the shape of the trap is intended to mimic the bole of a tree. Therefore, beetles need to be able to see the trap. Don't hide the trap. At the same time, direct sun exposure will often cause the lures to run out prematurely, so it's best to choose a location that is shaded for much of the day. At the same time, keep in mind where human activity is likely to occur. Don't place traps in locations where they're likely to be tampered with. Compromise between these goals as necessary. Traps baited with IPS lure need special consideration. Due to the mass attack behavior many IPS have, placing a trap too close to a conifer host can initiate a significant and damaging attack on the tree. To avoid this, place the IPS baited trap at least 30 feet from any potential host. And finally, each combination of trap and lure needs to be at least 150 feet apart to prevent them from interfering with each other.
Top a mighty bridge, looking down on the rocks below. We were out on that day to catch some fish. This is a